Let's continue to look at this context in which our story is set to understand something of the history and the political intrigue that there is going on. You know, 30 years have passed since John's been born to when John and Jesus begin their ministry. 30 years between Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3. We see that Herod the Great has died, and having had this horrific rule where he's murdered he's murdered his children and his wife and hundreds and thousands of people. Archelaus comes to rule the area of Judea, but ends up getting deposed, and now you have a Roman rule that eventually leads to Pontius Pilate being the ruler. Herod has another son, and this son Philip, who we mentioned was the son of Cleopatra of Jerusalem, and he starts to rule in the northeast area of Israel, and by all accounts is a pretty poor area, but he seems to have ruled pretty well. And as you know, the area is predominantly a non-Jewish, non-religious area, and so he gets probably a bit of an easier time than some of the other Herods, but by all accounts he ruled pretty well, and he ruled for many years. And the only other thing really to note about his rule is that he married his niece, a lady called Salome, and Salome was the daughter of Herodias, and those two feature quite predominantly in our story of our hero, as we will see later on. But the third ruler, so we have Herod Archelaus, who's been deposed and been replaced by Roman military rule. We have Philip the Tetrarch ruling wisely in the northeast. You then have a third ruler, Herod Antipas, and he rules over the region of Galilee for about 40 years. And a bit like his father, he's not particularly great. He tries to live a bit of a dual life where he tries to be a Jew to the Jews and a Roman to the Romans. He compromises his values like his father did, and the Jews, they don't trust him 1 inch. They don't like him, they don't trust him. Apart from a group called the Pharisees, and the Pharisees together with a secular non-religious group called the Herodians, they were supporters of Herod. You know, they liked the political power. Some of the things that Herod Antipas did was he built a new town called Sepphoris. And Sepphoris was about 3 miles from Nazareth, where Jesus was growing up. So can you imagine, in these 30 years between when we last encountered the birth of these babies and now we're seeing them step onto the scene, they're growing up watching this town being built, probably as children watching it growing, but also maybe even Jesus as a carpenter was working, helping to build this city that Herod Antipas was creating. Herod Antipas also built a city on the banks of Galilee called Tiberias, and he built it for the emperor Tiberius. He built it as a sort of gift and as a sort of sucking up to him to sort of gain favour, because Tiberius, for all of his support of Herod Antipas, didn't much like him, didn't trust him. And Herod Antipas, he was a bit of a conspirator. You know, he was seeking power, seeking to promote himself, and that he has a history of undermining different delegations that came. You know, when he's sort of holding a peace treaty, in the meanwhile he's sending people off to the emperor, claiming that he's succeeded where others haven't, which isn't true, and he makes an awful lot of enemies. Remember that we talked about Herod the Great murdering his favourite wife Marianne, and he had 2 children by Marianne, who he also murdered, Alexander and Aristobulus. And Aristobulus had 2 children, and it's worth noting something about these children, that the grandchildren of Herod the Great, the children of Aristobulus, one of them was called Herodias. His daughter Herodias marries Philip, who was not the Philip the Tetrarch, but another one of Herod's sons. It's I guess he must have been struggling for names, because he kept calling his children with the same names. He had 2 Philips, and he called lots of children Herod. He even had 2 wives called Marianne. So Herod must have been struggling for names somewhere along the line. But he has a son called Philip, by a different wife to Philip the Tetrarch. And this Philip marries his niece, Herodias. Herodias marries her uncle. And one day, Antipas is going to a bit of a party which his brother Philip is hosting. And while he's there, he sees Herodias, and he begins to lust after her. He begins to fancy her, so much so that he decides he's going to take her as his wife. The problem is, Antipas is already married to the daughter of King Aretas of Arabia. So he decides to divorce his first wife in order to marry Herodias. And in divorcing her, he creates even more enemies than he had before. He angers the Jews because he's gone against all of God's laws. But he also angers Aretas, the father of this daughter who's been wronged, who's been divorced just because he fancied another woman. And as a result, Aretas goes to war against Antipas. And Antipas has to call on the emperor for help. By which time it's Caligula, and Caligula doesn't particularly like Antipas, but nonetheless sends an army to the rescue. And it's the beginning of Antipas's end, where he begins to lose the support. However, there's more to the story than that.